The city was drowning in a thick, suffocating fog that clung to everything, a silent reminder of how little control anyone had over their own fate. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel heavy, like the weight of the world was pressing down from above, and the sun barely had the strength to break through. In the midst of this mist, Maya Walker stood at the glass doors of the corporate building, her breath fogging up the window as she took one last, deep inhale. Today was the day. The day her life could change forever, but it didn't feel like it. She was pregnant, 8 months along, and still, her heart raced with nervous anticipation. This was her dream job, the one she'd worked her whole life to get into. A position that would secure her future, give her family everything they never had, and push her beyond the limits of what she ever imagined possible. A job at the prestigious Crowley Industries, one of the biggest names in the business world. But for Maya, this wasn't just about career ambition. This was about proving everyone wrong, everyone who had ever doubted her, who had looked at her and seen only the color of her skin or the curve of her belly. Today, she was determined to show them that she wasn't just another statistic, another woman of color trying to climb a corporate ladder. She stepped inside, the chill of the building sending a shiver up her spine. The lobby was bright, polished, with gleaming marble floors that reflected her image back at her like 1,000 silent eyes. She couldn't help but notice the way people moved around her, too quickly, too focused, as if they were afraid she would disrupt the smooth rhythm of their perfect world. "Excuse me, Miss Walker?" A voice pulled her from her thoughts. Maya turned to see a young woman in a crisp navy suit standing at the reception desk. She was smiling, but there was something about it that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, that's me," Maya replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the nervous lump in her throat. "Right this way, please," the receptionist gestured, leading Maya down a sleek, cold hallway that felt more like a corridor to some other world. Maya's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, each step echoing, almost too loud in the silence. She could feel the weight of the eyes following her, not just the eyes of the staff, but the eyes of the very building itself. Watching, judging, waiting. As they reached the conference room, the door swung open with a sharp swoosh. Maya stepped inside. The room was a cold, sterile place, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made the polished wood of the table look even more imposing. There were 3 people sitting at the table, all white, all staring at her as though she had walked into the wrong place. "Please, have a seat," a middle-aged man said with a tight, almost condescending smile, gesturing to the chair across from him. Maya sat down, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She smiled back, but it was more of a reflex than anything genuine. "So, Ms. Walker," the man continued, his voice like gravel, "tell us why you think you're the right fit for this position. The CEO of Crowley Industries is a man of very high standards, as I'm sure you know." Maya nodded, keeping her face composed. She knew what was coming. It was always the same. They would question her qualifications, her experience, her ability to work in a world that didn't seem built for people like her. But she was ready. She had practiced this moment 1,000 times in front of the mirror, speaking her truth, rehearsing every word. "I believe I have the skills, the knowledge, and the vision to contribute to your company," she started, her voice steady despite the growing tension in the room. "I've spent years building my career, and I've done so by consistently outperforming expectations, by pushing myself past what others thought was possible for someone like me." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Someone like you." The younger woman to her left, who had been silent up until now, raised an eyebrow and exchanged a quick look with the man across from her. "Yes," Maya replied, her back straightening. "Someone who doesn't fit the mold. But that's exactly why I'm here. To break that mold." A quiet laugh rippled across the table. It wasn't a pleasant laugh. It was one of those laughs that seemed rehearsed, practiced, like a joke no one had really understood but felt obligated to chuckle at anyway. Maya's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't flinch. She had seen this before. "Well," the man said, his tone dripping with a kind of detached amusement, "it's not every day we get such confident candidates. He paused, eyes flicking down to her swollen belly for just a fraction of a second before he looked back up at her with feigned interest. I imagine that being pregnant doesn't leave you with a lot of time for corporate hours, does it? The tension in the room escalated, thickening the air until it felt suffocating. Maya's skin prickled as she forced herself to hold the man's gaze. But she could see the others, the young woman to her left, the older man across from her, their eyes scanning her body, her condition, as if they were measuring her worth based on some invisible scale. The harsh reality of their judgment was already starting to sting. And then, in that moment, Maya realized they weren't just judging her resume. They weren't even judging her qualifications. They were judging her skin, her pregnancy, her very existence in this room. She felt the weight of it all bearing down on her, but she didn't break. Not yet. As they continued to speak over her, each word a thinly veiled barb, a quiet anger began to simmer inside her. But Maya kept smiling, because the truth was, she didn't need to prove herself to them. She had something none of them could see coming. And it was only a matter of time before they'd find out. The seconds dragged on like hours as Maya sat in that sterile conference room, every word, every glance, adding more weight to the atmosphere. Her back straightened even further, trying to project confidence, trying to block out the oppressive atmosphere that surrounded her. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on the questions, the sneering undertone of their voices echoed in her mind, each word digging deeper into her self-assurance. So Maya, the middle-aged man whose name she hadn't bothered to catch, leaned forward, steepling his fingers in front of him. You say you have experience managing teams. Tell me, how do you think you'd handle overseeing high-stakes projects while… He paused for effect, his eyes dropping to her belly, while also managing the demands of motherhood. The way he said motherhood was so dismissive, as if it were some sort of burden she was carrying rather than a personal choice. His expression was one of polite curiosity, but Maya knew better. He was testing her, probing her for weaknesses, seeing how far he could push before she cracked. I believe a successful career requires balancing personal and professional lives, Maya replied, her voice as steady as she could make it. And my pregnancy is not something that will impede my ability to work. If anything, it has given me more motivation to succeed. The young woman to the left of her shifted in her seat, glancing up at the others before quickly dropping her eyes back to the table. Her lips twitched as though she were about to speak, but she thought better of it. Maya could feel the tension building, the condescending glances, the quiet mockery. They thought her story, her ambitions, were a joke. Motivation, yes, the man mused, his gaze drifting over her again, lingering on her rounded belly. And how do you plan on staying motivated during the long nights, the early mornings? How do you think you'll manage those board meetings and reports when you're, well, at home with a baby? There it was, the implicit question, the one Maya had been preparing herself for, the one they didn't even have the decency to phrase politely. They didn't care about her skills, her potential. They cared about the fact that she was pregnant, that she was black, and that, in their eyes, made her less capable. A cold knot tightened in Maya's stomach. It was so transparent, so deliberate, the way they were trying to get under her skin. Their judgment was palpable, their assumptions so loud they didn't even need to speak them out loud. It was in the way they looked at her, the way they barely acknowledged her credentials or her passion. To them, she was a novelty, a curiosity. I've managed projects in much more demanding situations, Maya said, her voice sharp. I've worked with executives who don't believe in the concept of work-life balance. I've met those challenges, and I'll meet this one too. Her words hung in the air, thick with the weight of defiance. But the woman beside her let out a small, almost inaudible laugh, the sound grating on Maya's nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. You know, the woman spoke up, her tone casual, almost playful. I'm not sure you fully understand what you're signing up for. It's not like a regular job where you get to just clock out. When you're in a position like this, you're expected to be available at all times. She glanced at her colleagues as though seeking validation. I mean, how can someone in your condition manage that? It's just so demanding. Maya's blood ran cold. She could feel the undercurrent of mockery, the almost gleeful way they were poking fun at her. It wasn't enough for them to see her as unqualified. They had to see her as lesser, as though she were a child playing dress-up, pretending to be something she was not. Right, because being a woman and being black makes things extra challenging, Maya said, her voice low but laced with an undeniable edge. She wasn't sure where the words came from, but the moment they left her mouth, they felt like a truth she had been holding back for far too long. You see it that way, don't you? There was a beat of silence, a heavy, almost suffocating pause that seemed to stretch on forever. The woman's smile faltered for a brief moment, and the older man shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For a split second, Maya thought she might have made them uncomfortable. But then the moment passed. The young woman chuckled, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was sharp, condescending, almost predatory. Of course not, she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. I'm sure you're just fine. I mean, it's just, we're all concerned about the bigger picture here. Maya's chest tightened, but she held her ground, refusing to let them see the pain their words were causing. They were trying to break her, to push her to a point where she would lose control, where her frustration would spill over, and they would have a reason to dismiss her. They wanted to prove that she was emotional, irrational, incapable of handling the high demands of their world. But Maya wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. The man at the head of the table cleared his throat. Well, Maya, he said, his tone suddenly turning businesslike. It's clear you're passionate about your career, but passion doesn't always equate to success. Sometimes the reality of the situation just doesn't line up with the ideal. And I'm afraid that in this case, we have some reservations. Maya blinked, her throat tightening. There it was, the moment she had feared, the moment they would tell her they didn't think she was good enough. But instead of feeling anger, all she felt was a dull, crushing emptiness. The humiliation she had been bracing for hit her like a ton of bricks. They weren't even hiding it anymore. It wasn't about her qualifications, her achievements, her experience. It was about the fact that she was pregnant and black, and they couldn't see beyond that. They thought they could break her, shatter her with their words and their sideways glances. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. Maya smiled, a small, controlled smile. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, her pulse a low hum beneath her skin. But she wasn't going to let them see her sweat. Thank you for your time, she said, standing up and brushing off her skirt as she made her way toward the door. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, just as she was about to step out, the man spoke again. We'll be in touch, he said, but his voice didn't carry the warmth of a real promise. It was dismissive, like a finality, like he was already ready to forget her. Maya stepped out into the hall, the door closing softly behind her. She leaned against the wall, her hand on her stomach as she closed her eyes. For a moment, everything around her felt like a blur. The hallway, the glass doors, the world outside. It all seemed so distant, so far away. But then, through the fog of disappointment and humiliation, Maya felt a flicker of something far stronger than anger. It was the fire of something deeper, the feeling of being underestimated, belittled, judged without cause. It burned within her, and it was only just beginning. She wasn't going to let them win. Not today, not ever. As she straightened up, pushing the door open, she knew one thing for sure. They had no idea who they had just crossed. They had no idea the kind of storm they had just unleashed. And when the truth came crashing down, they would never see it coming. She smiled to herself as she walked out of the building. There was a long road ahead, and Maya knew it wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't afraid anymore. The battle was only just beginning. Maya Walker sat in her car, the engine running, but her hands frozen on the wheel. The weight of the day pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. The quiet hum of the engine was the only sound in the otherwise empty parking lot, a stark contrast to the clattering thoughts that churned in her mind. She had thought she was prepared for rejection. After all, she knew the game. She knew what it felt like to be underestimated, to be the other, the one who didn't fit into the mold. But something about today had broken her resolve. The subtle, calculated cruelty of their words had seeped into her very bones. It wasn't just about her qualifications. It wasn't about her being pregnant either. It was about the way they looked at her, as if she were invisible, as if her very presence had to be tolerated rather than welcomed. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. She hadn't cried, not yet, but the anger was there, swirling just beneath the surface. It was a fire that burned hotter than any humiliation they could throw at her. Maya glanced at her phone, the screen flashing with a message. Her stomach sank as she saw the name. Jason, her husband. She had promised herself she wouldn't tell him about the interview. Not yet. Not until she knew for sure. But the truth was, she didn't want to disappoint him. Jason was the CEO of Crowley Industries, and even though he had never used his position to get her anything, not once, the weight of knowing she was a part of the company felt like a constant shadow hanging over her. Taking a deep breath, she unlocked the phone and opened the message. "How did it go, baby? Hope it went well. Call me when you can. Love you." Maya closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. She hated that she couldn't give him the good news. She hated that she couldn't tell him that this interview, this opportunity, had been everything she'd dreamed of. She didn't want to drag him into her mess, not when it was clear that nothing was going to change unless she made it happen herself. With a sharp swipe of her finger, she erased the message and put the phone down, focusing on the road ahead. But the gnawing feeling in her stomach wouldn't go away. The interview, the way they treated her, the way they dismissed her, it all circled back in her mind, relentless. The following days were a blur of work, routine, and the quiet, gnawing ache of rejection. Maya buried herself in her tasks at her current job, trying to focus on anything but the fact that her future at Crowley Industries was slipping further away with each passing hour. The rejection stung, but it was the blatant disregard for her as a person that haunted her. She couldn't stop replaying the way the man at the table had looked at her, the way the young woman had laughed behind her hand, the way the others had so easily dismissed her. Their mockery had not been overt. It had been subtle, almost too quiet to notice unless you were paying attention. She had seen the way their eyes darted to her stomach, the unspoken questions they had all been too polite to ask. The silence had been the worst part, because it wasn't the kind of silence that let you think you'd imagined it. No, it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. The silence that told her they thought she didn't belong. The silence that told her, in no uncertain terms, that her worth was being measured by an invisible scale, one she could never meet. And that thought stung more than anything. A few days after the interview, Maya's phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't from Jason, but from a number she didn't recognize. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the text. "Maya, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the office tomorrow? I have some feedback on your interview." Her stomach twisted. The last thing she wanted was to face them again, but she knew she couldn't ignore the message. It was too vague, too open-ended. If she ignored it, it would haunt her. She needed closure, even if that closure would hurt. The next morning, she dressed in the same suit she had worn for the interview, her fingers brushing the fabric as if it were a shield, something to protect her from the weight of whatever was coming. She took the long way to the office, letting herself sink into the routine of driving, focusing on the road, anything to push the anxiety out of her mind. When Maya arrived at Crowley Industries, she hesitated for a moment in the parking lot, her eyes scanning the sleek modern building. It seemed colder today, its glass exterior reflecting a sky that had grown darker, heavier. Inside, the atmosphere felt even more oppressive. The reception area, which had once felt so polished and welcoming, now felt sterile, empty. Maya's steps echoed through the high-ceilinged lobby as she walked toward the elevator. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step bringing her closer to whatever awaited her. As the elevator doors slid open, Maya was greeted by the same receptionist from before. This time, the smile didn't reach the woman's eyes. "Ms. Walker," the receptionist said, her voice tight. "Mr. Larkin is waiting for you." Maya nodded and followed the woman through the sleek corridors, her pulse quickening with every step. The room where she had sat for the interview was just ahead, but today it felt different. It felt smaller somehow. The air was thick with tension, and as the receptionist opened the door, Maya was greeted by the same three faces, the same faces that had dismissed her not so long ago. But this time, there was something new. There was no politeness, no pretending. Their expressions were colder, sharper. The man who had questioned her qualifications now had his fingers steepled in front of his mouth, his gaze calculating as he looked at her. The young woman's lips were pressed into a thin line, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. The older woman who had laughed at Maya's expense was now leaning back in her chair, her eyes narrowed. "Please, take a seat," the man said, his tone suddenly curt. Maya sat down, a tightness creeping into her chest as she tried to meet their eyes. But it was clear that they weren't going to make this easy for her. "We've reviewed your interview," the man continued, his voice cool. "And we've decided to move forward with another candidate." Maya's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. The words felt like a punch to her stomach, but she knew she couldn't show them how much it hurt. "I understand," she said, her voice steady, though her insides were screaming. "But may I ask why?" The man exchanged a glance with the others before answering. "It's nothing personal, Maya, but we felt that your condition was not in alignment with the high demands of the role. We need someone who can be fully present, someone who can travel at a moment's notice, who can stay late, who can handle everything the position requires. Your pregnancy, your family situation." He trailed off, as if the words were too hard to say, but Maya knew exactly what he meant. The young woman to his left spoke up then, her voice colder than before. "And we don't believe you'd be able to keep up with the fast-paced environment we maintain here. The demands are intense, and frankly, we think it would be too much for you." The words were like a slap to her face, not because they were new. She had heard them before, time and time again, but because this time, they were coming from people who should have known better. People who were supposed to be more evolved, more progressive. But there was no understanding here, no empathy, no acknowledgement of the sheer effort it had taken for Maya to even get to this point. It was racism, thinly veiled behind the guise of professionalism. It was the subtle, insidious kind of bias that crept into the spaces between their words, behind their smiles, and in the way they looked at her, as though she were too much of a liability, too much of an inconvenience. Maya swallowed hard, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The anger that had been smouldering inside her was finally breaking free, but she knew she had to keep control. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her lose her composure. "I see," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for your time." And with that, she stood up, turning on her heel and walking out of the room. As she stepped into the hallway, the door closed behind her with a soft click, and the weight of everything that had happened, everything that had been said, crashed down on her. The tears that she had been holding back for so long finally threatened to fall, but Maya refused to let them. She was done. They thought they had broken her. They thought they had beaten her, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. She had one last thing to say, and it would be said with action, not words. "Before we continue, let's take a brief pause. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to our stories from? Have you ever experienced something similar in your life? Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Now let's dive back into the story. Maya Walker hadn't meant to cry. She had promised herself she wouldn't. Not in front of them, not in front of anyone. The tears that had threatened to spill out of her eyes as she left the building were forced back. The only sound was the rush of her footsteps as she made her way through the parking lot, her heart pounding against her chest. It felt like her chest was a cage, and every breath she took was a struggle. She was angry. More than angry, actually. She was enraged, and yet all that rage was a quiet hum in the back of her mind. like a fire smoldering beneath the surface. But the humiliation was what hurt the most. The way they looked at her, the way they dismissed her, the way they acted as though her pregnancy and her race were the only things that mattered, not her talent, her drive, her decades of hard work. Those thoughts swirled inside her head, a storm of frustration and bitterness that refused to be calmed. Her phone buzzed again as she reached her car. She didn't even have to check to know who it was. Jason, her husband, the man she loved, the one who had always supported her dreams, always encouraged her to push forward, to chase after what she deserved. But today, she couldn't answer his message. She couldn't bring herself to tell him what had happened. She couldn't bear to admit that once again, the world had shown her exactly where she stood. She slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and sat there for a moment, letting the tears fall. They weren't just for the interview. They were for everything that had led up to it. The quiet looks of judgment she'd received all her life. The casual racism that had been woven into every conversation, every decision. The unspoken rule that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how successful she became, she would always be an outsider, never truly accepted. For years she had told herself it didn't matter. She had built a life, a career, even a family, despite the odds stacked against her. She had made it this far. She had done everything right. And yet here she was again, rejected, unseen, and worse, humiliated. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, took a deep breath, and started the car. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She had to focus. She couldn't let this define her. She wouldn't let it define her. Boakans. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of red and orange, Maya sat at the kitchen table, a steaming mug of tea in her hands. Jason was working late again, and Maya was left alone with her thoughts. The house was quiet, too quiet. It wasn't the usual kind of quiet she enjoyed. It was oppressive, like a weight pressing down on her chest, and she couldn't shake the feeling that everything around her was closing in. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message from Jason. This time it was an email. Maya stared at the screen, reading the subject line over and over again, as if her mind was playing tricks on her. Crowley Industries, interview outcome. She clicked it open without thinking, her eyes scanning the screen quickly. Dear Ms. Walker, thank you for your recent interview with Crowley Industries. After careful consideration, we regret to inform you that we have decided to move forward with another candidate for the position you applied for. While we were impressed with your qualifications, we felt that the demands of the role would not align with your personal situation. We appreciate your time and interest in Crowley Industries and wish you the best in your future endeavors. The email felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't enough for them to just reject her in person. They had to rub it in, even in writing. They had to make sure she knew it wasn't just about her qualifications. It was about her being pregnant. It was about her race. And they had made it clear, no matter how good she was, no matter how hard she fought to prove herself, she would always be second-rate in their eyes. She could almost hear their voices now, the sneering tones, the dismissive glances, the way they had looked down on her as though she were a child, as though she didn't belong. She had known deep down that this was how it would end, but that didn't make the sting any less painful. Maya sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the email. She should have expected it. She should have known better. But it still hurt. It always hurt. The constant reminders that no matter how far she climbed, there would always be a ceiling above her head, built from prejudice and bias. Finally, she clicked delete and put the phone down, her hands trembling. She was tired of fighting for a place that was never meant for her, tired of having to prove herself every single day. And yet, in the quiet of that moment, Maya knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let it go. She couldn't walk away from this. The next day, Jason came home late as usual. He had been so wrapped up in work lately, his phone glued to his hand, his mind always elsewhere. Maya had tried to wait for him, but the isolation was too much. She needed to speak to him, to tell him what had happened, but she couldn't find the words. When he walked through the door, he smiled, but it was one of those smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. It wasn't his fault. He had no idea what she had been through. "Maya," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. "I missed you today. How was your day? How did the interview go?" Her throat closed up as she stood there, his arms around her, his voice so familiar, so comforting. It felt like the only thing that was real, but the words wouldn't come. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Instead, she pulled away from him, wiping the tears from her eyes. "I didn't get the job," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Jason's face fell. He took a step back, his hand falling to his side. "What?" he asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. "But you were perfect for it. You were—" "They didn't want me, Jason. Not because I wasn't qualified. Not because I didn't work hard enough. They didn't want me because I'm pregnant and because I'm black." Jason opened his mouth to speak, but Maya raised a hand to stop him. She could see the shock in his eyes, but she didn't need his sympathy right now. She didn't need him to try to fix it. "I'm tired, Jason," she continued, her voice shaking. "I'm so tired. Every day I have to fight to prove I belong, and they just look at me like I'm not good enough, like I'm a joke." Jason was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, Maya felt the full weight of the conversation crash down on her. The truth was, no matter how much he loved her, no matter how much he supported her, he would never fully understand. He couldn't, not unless he had lived it. "I'm sorry, Maya," Jason finally said, his voice thick with guilt. "I didn't know. I didn't realize it was that bad." "I've been living with it for years, Jason," Maya replied, her voice raw. "It's not just about this one job. It's about every door that's ever been closed. Every time I've had to fight to prove I'm worth something, to prove I'm not a stereotype, to prove I'm not invisible." Jason stepped forward, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. "I don't know what to say, but I know you're strong. You'll get through this." Maya shook her head. "I'm tired of being strong. I'm tired of fighting, but I won't stop. I won't let them win." There was a long pause before Jason spoke again. "What are you going to do now?" Maya looked at him, her eyes hardening with a newfound resolve. "I'm going to make them see me, not just as a black woman, not just as a pregnant woman, but as someone who is capable of anything." Jason nodded, a quiet pride in his eyes. He didn't fully understand, but he was learning. He had to, and Maya was ready to show them all what she was truly capable of. The fight was just beginning. Maya hadn't expected Jason to understand everything, but she had hoped for more. She had hoped that somehow he would see the layers of struggle beneath her calm exterior. But as the days passed, the silence between them grew heavier. He went to work, his usual hours, his phone glued to his hand. Maya found herself in the same routine, doing the things she had always done, keeping the house running, tending to her growing belly, but now with an edge of bitterness she couldn't shake. The interviews, the rejections, the subtle but ever-present racism, it had all come to a boiling point. She had dealt with it for years, tried to ignore it, tried to rise above, but this time, it felt different. This time, it felt personal. The rejection from Crowley Industries had been a final blow, but it was also the spark she needed to light a fire within her that she hadn't known was there. She couldn't just let it go. She couldn't let them win. She had spent her whole life fighting for her place in a world that told her she didn't belong, that she wasn't enough. But Maya knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let them define her. Not anymore. It was late one evening when she found herself sitting at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop. She had spent the better part of the day searching for other opportunities, sending out applications, tailoring her resume, but the weight of the rejection she had faced still lingered in the back of her mind, making it hard to focus. Her phone buzzed. It was an email notification. At first, she hesitated to open it, but then she clicked it anyway. "Dear Ms. Walker," the email began. "We regret to inform you that we have decided to move forward with another candidate for the position." Her heart sank. Another rejection. Another closed door. She closed her laptop with a sharp snap, frustration bubbling up inside her. The feeling of being underestimated, disregarded, never went away. It was a weight she carried with her everywhere. And no matter how many times she tried to push it down, it always rose back up, stronger than before. As she sat there, her hands clenched into fists on the table, she realized something. The fight wasn't just about finding another job. It wasn't just about proving herself to these companies that couldn't see beyond her race or her pregnancy. It was about something much bigger. She was tired of being told she wasn't good enough. She was tired of pretending it didn't bother her when people looked at her differently, when they dismissed her without even knowing her. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and yet it was never enough. They always found a reason to say no, always found a reason to keep her out. But she wasn't going to keep fighting for their approval. She didn't need them. She was going to build something of her own. The following day, Maya took the first step. She reached out to her old network, former colleagues, mentors, people who had watched her grow, people who knew her worth. The response wasn't immediate, but when it came, it was overwhelming. People who had once looked past her because of her race, her gender, her status as a pregnant woman, were now eager to help. They saw something in her that the people at Crowley Industries had missed. The drive, the resilience, the refusal to back down. She didn't wait. She started making calls. She began to carve out a space for herself, not in someone else's company, but in her own. Chasa. A week later, Maya sat in a small, modest office building on the other side of town. The job was a far cry from the high-powered position she had once dreamed of, but it was a start, a chance to prove herself, not to anyone else, but to herself. She was tired of waiting for someone else to give her a chance. She was going to take it. The interview was different from the ones she had experienced before. There were no subtle looks, no whispered judgments. It was just her qualifications, and the opportunity to show what she could do. The interviewers, a group of women who had fought their own battles in a world that often dismissed them, didn't see her race or her pregnancy as a limitation. They saw her potential. By the end of the interview, Maya felt a strange sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. She had made it past the first hurdle. But it wasn't just the job that gave her that feeling. It was the realization that she no longer had to bend to fit someone else's mold. She was going to forge her own path no matter how long it took. Chance. As the days turned into weeks, Maya settled into her new job. The work was hard, the hours long, but she loved every minute of it. It was challenging in a way she hadn't experienced before. The people she worked with were kind, supportive, and didn't judge her. She didn't have to constantly prove herself to anyone. They recognized her for what she brought to the table, a sharp mind, a strong work ethic, and the kind of determination that wouldn't let anything stand in her way. But the world wasn't done testing her yet. One afternoon, while Maya was sitting in the break room, a co-worker she had barely spoken to came in and sat down across from her. Maya looked up, expecting the usual small talk, but instead, the woman's expression was unreadable. "Can I ask you something?" the co-worker said, her tone oddly curious. Maya nodded, unsure of where this was going. "Sure. Do you think it's harder for people like you to get ahead in this industry?" the woman asked, her voice too casual, as if she were asking about the weather. Maya's stomach tightened. She had heard the question before, in different forms, in different places, but hearing it here, in this new environment where she had finally felt accepted, made her bristle. "What do you mean, people like me?" Maya asked, keeping her voice calm, though she could feel the tension rising inside her. The woman leaned back in her chair, eyes scanning the room as if she were trying to choose her words carefully. "You know, black women, women who have other things going on. Pregnancy, for example." Maya's blood ran cold. This was no innocent question. It was a challenge, an attempt to make her feel small, to remind her of her place. For a moment, Maya considered walking away, just leaving the room, ignoring the question, not giving the woman the satisfaction of an answer. But then she remembered something. This wasn't about just her anymore. It wasn't just about her fight for respect, her fight for recognition. It was about all the women who had been told they couldn't make it. All the women who had been passed over, overlooked, and dismissed. I think, Maya said, her voice steady and measured, that people like me have to fight twice as hard to get half as far. But we make it, because we don't let people like you decide our worth. The woman's expression faltered for a moment, then returned to the neutral mask she had worn when she first sat down. She didn't respond. She just stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, and walked out of the room without another word. Maya sat there for a long time, her fingers wrapped around the edge of the table, the weight of the conversation settling in her chest. She wasn't surprised. In fact, she had expected it, but it still stung. The world wasn't done trying to break her. It wasn't done reminding her that no matter how far she climbed, there would always be someone waiting to pull her back down. But this time, Maya wasn't going to let them. This time, she was ready. She had a fire inside her that they couldn't put out, and she was going to burn their walls to the ground. She wasn't just going to survive, she was going to thrive. As Maya's resolve hardened with every passing day, she had learned that the fight wasn't just about one job, one company, or one person's opinion. It was about rewriting the rules, setting her own terms. The world had shown her who they thought she was, but Maya knew better. She was more than what they saw, more than what they wanted her to be, and she wasn't going to stop until they all knew it. The battle was far from over, but Maya was ready for whatever came next. It had been months since Maya had started her new job, and though things had improved in many ways, the feeling of being constantly watched, constantly judged, never truly disappeared. The small victories were there. Her colleagues were starting to recognize her skills and abilities, and she had earned a modicum of respect from them. But the whispers, the side glances, the subtle, insidious racism that still clung to the air around her, it was hard to ignore. Every day was a reminder that, no matter how hard she worked, how good she was at her job, there would always be something else, something they wouldn't let her forget, and it was exhausting. Maya was sitting in a conference room one morning, going over notes for a presentation, when she heard the door creak open. She didn't look up immediately, thinking it was just a colleague stopping by. But then, a voice she recognized, though not warmly, broke through her concentration. "Ms. Walker," the voice said, "mind if we have a word?" Maya looked up to see Anthony, one of the senior managers, standing in the doorway. His face was neutral, but there was something behind his eyes that made Maya's stomach tighten. He wasn't exactly a friend, and he certainly wasn't someone who had ever been particularly friendly toward her. "Sure," Maya said, sitting up straighter and setting her notes aside. Anthony stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. His presence was oppressive, the kind of man who felt entitled to walk into any space and have everyone take him seriously. But Maya wasn't intimidated. She had learned not to be. "I need to talk to you about your performance," Anthony said, his voice flat. Maya raised an eyebrow, but didn't speak. She could feel the tension building, the carefully chosen words that never seemed to lead anywhere good. She had been in enough corporate meetings to recognize the prelude to another round of thinly veiled criticism. "I've been reviewing the numbers," he continued, "and it seems like there are some areas where you're not quite meeting expectations." Maya's heartbeat quickened. She had always been meticulous about her work. She knew her numbers. She knew her presentations. If she had missed something, it was likely a minor detail, something that wouldn't have been worthy of this level of scrutiny. But Anthony wasn't looking at her with curiosity or genuine concern. No, this was something different. This was the familiar feeling of being picked apart, of being forced to prove herself in ways that others didn't have to. "What do you mean by not meeting expectations?" Maya asked, her voice steady but cool. She refused to let him bait her. Anthony took a step forward. pulling up a chair and sitting down across from her. He folded his arms across his chest, his expression unreadable. Let's just say I'm concerned about your ability to handle some of the more demanding clients we've been working with. You're still adjusting to the workload, right? A little bit slower than we'd like. Maya bit back the words that threatened to spill out. He wasn't talking about her performance. He was talking about the way he saw her, the way they all saw her. She wasn't slow, she wasn't unqualified. She was pregnant, and that was something they couldn't seem to get past. The rest of her accomplishments, her sharp mind, her diligence, her attention to detail, didn't seem to matter. I'm not sure I understand, Maya said, her voice tight. I've been handling my workload just fine. My numbers are consistent, and I've delivered results. I've met every deadline. Yes, of course, Anthony said, brushing her words aside with a wave of his hand. But you see, when you're in a position like yours, there's always that extra bit of pressure, that extra layer of scrutiny. You have to be a little faster, a little sharper, and, well. He let his voice trail off, his eyes flicking down toward her stomach in a way that made Maya's blood run cold. Her chest tightened. It was happening again. The thing is, Anthony continued, his tone becoming almost condescending, you have a lot going on right now. You have a lot to juggle. Pregnancy, personal stuff. I just wonder if you're able to keep up with the pace. It was like a slap to the face. But Maya had already learned not to show her emotions. She had learned that the only way to survive in this world was to keep it together, no matter how much it hurt. She took a deep breath. I can handle the workload, Anthony, she said, her voice low but firm. I've handled more difficult situations in the past. I'm more than capable. Anthony didn't look convinced. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. You know, he said, his voice suddenly taking on a more jovial tone. We're just concerned. We want to make sure you're not spreading yourself too thin, especially with your condition. He leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. You don't want to push yourself too hard. You have to think about the baby, right? Her breath hitched. The subtle racism, the casual sexism, the way he spoke to her. It was all so familiar, so predictable. They always acted like she couldn't handle it, like she was a woman first, a black woman first, and everything else second. I am fully capable of handling my responsibilities, Maya said, her voice almost a whisper. Anthony's smile widened, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who thought he had won, who thought he had proven a point. Of course, Maya. Of course. Just keep that in mind. He stood up, straightening his suit jacket, and gave her a final glance. We'll be watching. Keep up the good work. As the door closed behind him, Maya remained seated, her fists clenched on the table in front of her. She wasn't sure if it was the anger or the exhaustion that made her feel the most defeated. All she had wanted was to be treated fairly. All she had wanted was to prove that she was more than the label they had placed on her. But that was never going to happen. They would never see her as anything other than what they wanted her to be. Maya didn't know how long she sat there in the quiet conference room, her mind racing. But eventually, she stood up and left the room, determined to move forward. She couldn't let him, or anyone else, define her. She had worked too hard, come too far to let them take her down now. But as she passed through the hallway, she heard a familiar voice. It was the voice of a woman she knew well, but who had never once offered her any support, despite their shared position in the company. Hey Maya, the woman said, stepping into her path. You're still doing well, right? Maya's eyes narrowed as she faced her. Yes, I'm fine. The woman's gaze flicked down to her stomach, her expression unreadable. You know, I've heard some things about how you're handling the pressure. Some people are wondering if you're going to be able to keep up once things get even more intense around here. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the whispers before, but now it was different. Now they were no longer just whispers. They were starting to take root in the most dangerous way possible. I've handled plenty of pressure, Maya said, her voice low and sharp, and I will continue to handle it. If you have any concerns, Feel free to speak to me directly, but don't stand here and gossip about me." The woman raised an eyebrow, taken aback by Maya's words. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then the woman shrugged, her lips curling into a tight, almost pitying smile. "Of course, just making sure you're holding up, Maya. We wouldn't want you to burn out, right?" Maya stared at her, but she didn't say anything. There was no point in responding. This was how it was now. This was how they saw her. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she proved herself, they would always find a reason to look down on her. They would always find a reason to question her ability. But Maya knew something that they didn't. She was done waiting for their approval. She was done letting them dictate her worth. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Later that evening, Maya sat alone at her kitchen table, the quiet of the house pressing in on her. She was exhausted, both mentally and physically, but despite it all, she knew she'd come too far to give up now. The world could keep trying to break her, but she would not be broken. She would rise above them. She would show them all. And when the time came, she would stand tall, not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough, for every person who had ever been underestimated, ignored, or pushed aside. Because Maya Walker was done playing by their rules. She was making her own, and they would learn to respect her, one way or another. It had been weeks since Maya's confrontation with Anthony, but the impact of that conversation was still weighing heavily on her. She had told herself she wouldn't let it affect her, that she would rise above it, but the truth was, it had shaken her. The subtle racism, the dismissive attitude, it was everywhere, creeping into the corners of her mind, lurking in the back of her thoughts. Maya had become used to the idea that nothing came easy for someone like her. She had learned to navigate the tightrope of being a black woman in a world that constantly sought to remind her of her differences. But lately, the barbs had been sharper, the whispers louder. She could feel their eyes on her every time she entered a room, every time she spoke up in a meeting. She could feel them wondering if she was too much, too loud, too confident, too present. But what bothered her the most wasn't the constant surveillance or the microaggressions. It wasn't even the fact that she was still having to prove herself at every turn. It was the cold, silent way they dismissed her. Like she was an outsider, someone who didn't belong, no matter how much she accomplished. That afternoon, as Maya sat at her desk, reviewing an important report for an upcoming meeting, she felt a shift in the air. The office had become quieter, as if everyone was holding their breath. She looked up and saw two of her colleagues, Sarah and Mark, standing at the far end of the room, speaking in hushed tones. They stopped when they noticed Maya's gaze on them, quickly turning their backs to her. But it was too late. Maya had already seen the way they looked at her. It was that familiar look, the one that said she wasn't enough, the one that said she didn't belong. Maya had been silent for so long, enduring the whispered conversations and the side glances. But this time, something inside her snapped. She couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't pretend that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. Later that day, Maya found herself standing outside the office of her manager, Lily Harper. Lily was a woman who had always played the game, who had climbed the corporate ladder with a smile, always keeping her personal biases carefully hidden beneath a polished exterior. But Maya knew the truth. She knew how Lily viewed her, just as she knew how everyone else did. She was just another black woman trying to make her way in a world that wasn't built for her. Maya knocked once before opening the door. She had made up her mind. Today, she was going to confront this head-on. "Lily, we need to talk," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. Lily looked up, startled by the directness in Maya's tone, but she quickly regained her composure. "Of course, Maya. Come in. What's on your mind?" Maya stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She stood there for a moment, collecting her thoughts. She had been rehearsing this conversation in her head for days, but now that she was here, it was harder than she had anticipated. Still, she couldn't back down. "I'm tired," Maya said, her voice quieter now, the weight of the words settling between them. tired of pretending that everything is fine, tired of the way I'm treated here. Lily raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Maya continued, her eyes locked on her manager's face. I've worked here for months now, Maya said, her voice growing stronger with each word, and I've proven myself time and time again. But it's never enough, is it? No matter what I do, no matter how good my work is, I'm always being measured by something else. Lily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but Maya could see the subtle way her manager's posture stiffened, as if she were bracing herself. She knew this wasn't going to be a comfortable conversation for either of them. But Maya was done with comfort. She was done with silence. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Maya pressed, her voice rising now. The way everyone looks at me like I'm some kind of threat. The way they look at me like I don't belong in the same room. I've had enough of it, Lily. I've had enough of the whispers behind my back, the subtle comments, the way everyone assumes I'm not capable. Lily opened her mouth, but no words came out. Maya didn't give her a chance to speak. I'm talking about the way Anthony treated me, the way Sarah and Mark look at me when they think I'm not paying attention. I'm talking about the way you and the rest of this company look at me and see nothing but a stereotype. You don't see a woman who's qualified, who's driven, who's capable. You see a black woman with a pregnant belly. You see someone who doesn't belong. Maya's words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. She was breathing hard now, the anger bubbling to the surface. But there was something else, something deeper, something that made her keep going. I'm tired of being the exception, tired of having to be better just to get the same recognition. I'm tired of walking into a room and knowing that no matter how hard I work, I'll always have to prove myself. I'm tired of being seen as less. There was a long silence. For a moment, Maya thought Lily wasn't going to say anything at all. Then, finally, Lily spoke. I didn't know you felt this way, Maya, she said, her voice low, almost apologetic. But you have to understand, we're all just trying to survive here. It's not just about you. It's about the pressures we all face. Maya clenched her fists at her sides, fighting the urge to shout. Don't patronize me, Lily. I don't need your sympathy. I need you to recognize what's happening here. I need you to see me, not as a black woman, not as a pregnant woman, but as a person who's qualified, who's capable. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the same treatment you give everyone else. Lily didn't respond immediately, and for a moment, Maya wondered if she had said too much. But then, Lily slowly nodded, her eyes meeting Maya's. You're right, she said softly. I've been blind to it. I see it now. And I will do better. I will make sure things change. Maya wasn't sure if she believed her, but it was a start. For the first time, she had said what needed to be said, and for the first time, someone had listened. The next day, things started to shift. Maya noticed it immediately. The atmosphere in the office felt different. It wasn't much, not yet, but there was a subtle change in the way people interacted with her. The whispers behind her back had quieted. The side glances had stopped. It was as if the company was starting to realize that Maya wasn't someone to be underestimated, someone to be treated differently. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges. There were still moments when she felt like she was being judged, moments when she could sense the underlying tension. But Maya wasn't going to let that stop her. She was done being the quiet one, the one who let things slide. She was done pretending that it didn't matter. Maya's resolve only grew stronger as the days went by. She kept pushing forward, not for anyone else, but for herself. She knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey, one that would take everything she had. But she was ready for it. Her phone buzzed later that afternoon. It was a message from Jason. How's everything going today? I'm proud of you, Maya. Keep pushing. She smiled, a small, quiet smile that spoke volumes. Jason didn't always understand what she was going through, but he had always believed in her, and that was enough. Maya took a deep breath, looking out the window at the city below. She had been fighting for so long, but now she was no longer fighting alone. She had her own voice, her own strength, and she would make sure that the world heard her. She wasn't just going to survive, she was going to thrive. And no one could take that away from her. Maya walked into the office that morning with a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in months. There was something different about the way she moved, something that radiated quiet confidence. She had confronted her fears, spoken her truth, and for the first time, she felt like she was no longer walking through the halls as a stranger. The people around her had begun to notice, some of them subtly adjusting their behavior, others outright offering support. But the change, the real change, had to come from her. The truth was, Maya had been waiting for this moment her entire life. The moment when she would no longer be silenced, when the world would no longer tell her that she had to shrink herself to fit into spaces that were never built for her. She had fought for everything she had, and now, she wasn't going to settle for anything less than her due. As she made her way to her desk, she could feel the weight of the stares that followed her. It was subtle, like a shiver that passed through the air, but it was there, unmistakable. She had made waves in the office when she confronted Lily about her treatment. And now, it was clear that not everyone was happy with the changes. Some of her colleagues had begun to shift uneasily, but others, they were starting to respect her, even if they didn't know it yet. Maya sat down at her desk and opened her laptop, but before she could get settled, the door to the office opened. She looked up to see her direct supervisor, a middle-aged man named George, standing in the doorway. His usual expression of stoic indifference was replaced with a tight smile, his eyes flicking nervously over her. "Maya, can I talk to you for a moment?" George asked, his voice not quite as friendly as it had been before. Maya had always known George to be somewhat distant, but today there was something different in the way he looked at her. It wasn't the usual polite disinterest. It was a wariness, as if he was treading carefully around her. "Sure," she replied evenly, pushing her chair back and standing up. George gestured for her to follow him into a nearby conference room, the door clicking shut behind them as they entered. Maya couldn't help but notice the slight unease in his movements, the same unease she had sensed in the eyes of others in the past few days. Once inside, George turned to face her, his hands clasped in front of him. "Maya," he began, his voice strained, "I want to address some concerns that have come up regarding your recent behavior in the office." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She knew exactly what this was about. She hadn't let the whispers and the sideways glances slide. She hadn't stayed quiet when she felt that people were treating her differently. She had made waves, and now they were trying to shut her down. "What concerns are those, George?" Maya asked, keeping her voice calm, though she could feel the edge of tension beginning to creep into her words. "Look," he said, shifting uncomfortably, "I'm not trying to undermine you, but there's been some feedback. Some of your colleagues have mentioned that they're feeling uncomfortable with the way you've been handling things, the way you've been confronting people." He paused, as though searching for the right words, but none of them seemed to come. Maya's mind raced. "Uncomfortable," she repeated. "Are you telling me that the issue isn't my work, my performance, but how I'm handling the fact that I'm being treated differently from everyone else?" George shifted again, his gaze flicking down to the floor. "I think you're making people nervous, Maya. People are worried about how things are going to change with you speaking out so openly. It's disrupting the flow of things." Maya's pulse quickened, but she remained silent, letting the words sink in. She had heard it before. It wasn't about the quality of her work. It wasn't about her professionalism. It was about her presence, her assertion. It was about the way she refused to let the subtle racism and bias slide anymore. "I'm not here to make anyone nervous," Maya said slowly, her voice controlled. "But I'm also not here to be invisible, George. I'm not here to be treated as less than." George looked uncomfortable, his eyes flicking to the side as if he couldn't quite meet her gaze. "I understand that, Maya, but you have to understand that your actions have consequences. If you continue to challenge the way things are done here, it could affect your position within the company." Maya's heart slammed in her chest, the sting of those words settling deep in her gut. They weren't even pretending anymore. They weren't trying to hide the fact that they wanted her to stay in her place, to stop questioning the system, to stop making things uncomfortable for them. I've always been qualified for this position, George, Maya said, her voice cold now. I've always done my job to the best of my ability. What you're telling me is that my value here is based on my silence, that I'm only valuable as long as I don't make anyone uncomfortable by demanding basic respect. George looked at her, but there was no sympathy in his eyes, only a thin veneer of professionalism that barely concealed his disdain. It's not about respect, Maya. It's about fitting in, about following the culture here. Maya took a step forward, her voice sharp. And that culture is one that tolerates racism, microaggressions, and sexism as long as it's convenient, right? Is that the culture you're talking about? Because I'm not going to be part of that anymore. I've spent my whole life trying to fit in, trying to be what you wanted me to be, but not anymore. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. George's face tightened, and for a moment, Maya thought he might snap at her. But instead, he simply nodded. I'm not sure this is going to work, Maya, he said quietly. Maybe it's best if we part ways. If you're not willing to fall in line, then perhaps you're not the right fit for this company after all. Maya stood there for a moment, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had expected this, in a way. She had known that by pushing back, by making herself known, she was putting everything at risk. But something inside her snapped. She had been silent for too long. She had played by their rules, followed their expectations, and it had gotten her nowhere. And now, for the first time, Maya was no longer afraid of what they might do. If that's what you think, George, she said, her voice cold and even, then maybe it's best if I go. But make no mistake, this is not about me not fitting in. This is about a system that doesn't know how to handle people like me. People who refuse to stay silent, people who demand respect. Without waiting for a response, Maya turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The later that evening, Maya sat at home, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, staring out the window as the rain began to fall. The conversation with George had left a bitter taste in her mouth, but it had also ignited something inside her. She was done. Done trying to fit into a place that didn't want her. Done being told she wasn't enough, that her voice didn't matter. But as the hours passed, she realized something else. This wasn't just about her. This was about every single person who had been pushed to the edge, who had been told they didn't belong, who had been forced to shrink themselves to fit into a mold that was never designed for them. Maya knew she had a choice now. She could walk away, go find another job where she could be accepted, where she could be treated with the respect she deserved. Or she could stay and fight, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. She wasn't going to let them win. She wasn't going to let their racism, their fear, their small-mindedness hold her back anymore. Maya Walker wasn't just fighting for a job. She was fighting for something much bigger. She was fighting for herself, for the people who had been silenced, for the people who had been told to stay in their place. She was going to show them all that she was more than what they thought she was, and this was just the beginning. Maya sat in the dim light of her apartment, her fingers tracing the edges of the mug she held. The steam from her tea rose into the cool air, but it did little to warm her. She had been contemplating the events of the last few days, the encounter with George, the subtle threat of being pushed out, and the cold realization that her fight was far from over. The choices she had made, the confrontation she had started. They had set something in motion, something she wasn't sure she was prepared for. But she knew one thing. She couldn't back down. She had always been the kind of woman who found ways to make things work, to navigate systems that weren't designed for her. But this time, the system had made its intentions clear. It wasn't just about her skill or her ability. It was about her place in the world, and they were making it clear that her place wasn't in their world. The call from Jason that night had been brief, but filled with his usual support. He told her that he was proud of her, but Maya could tell that there was concern in his voice. He didn't fully understand what she was facing. He couldn't. He had never been forced to fight for his right to exist in a space as she had. He didn't know what it felt like to be constantly reminded that you didn't belong. But Maya knew that the battle she was facing was only just beginning. The next morning, she arrived at the office with a new sense of clarity. There was no more room for hesitation, no more wondering if she should pull back. They had already shown her that they didn't care about her. They had already made it clear that they didn't care about her as a person, only as a function of the system they had built. Now, Maya was going to tear that system apart, piece by piece. As she walked past the security desk, she noticed how different the atmosphere felt. There was an electric buzz in the air, a sense of anticipation that she couldn't quite place. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that the world around her was about to shift in a way that she hadn't prepared for. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a text message from Lily. It read, "Maya, we need to meet. Please come to my office as soon as you arrive." A chill ran down her spine. She had expected some form of retaliation, but this felt different. It felt deliberate. But Maya didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She had already made her decision. There was no going back. When Maya arrived at Lily's office, the door was already open. Lily was sitting behind her desk, her usual professional mask in place. But today, there was something colder about her demeanor, something that made Maya's pulse quicken. "Maya, thank you for coming in," Lily said. Her voice clipped, as if she were trying to maintain control. Maya said nothing, simply nodding as she took a seat across from her. She could see the tension in Lily's shoulders, the way she was avoiding Maya's gaze. "We've had some complaints, Maya," Lily began, her voice soft but strained. "People are feeling that your actions are disrupting the harmony of the team." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Some people feel uncomfortable with the way you've been addressing issues of race and discrimination. They feel that you're making things tense around here." Maya's heart clenched, but she didn't allow it to show. "I'm not here to make people comfortable, Lily. I'm here to do my job, and to do it with the respect that I deserve, that we all deserve." Lily shifted in her seat, clearly unsettled by Maya's response. "I understand, Maya, I do. But this is a professional environment. We can't have personal issues bleeding into our work. The complaints are starting to come from higher ups, and if this continues, I'm afraid it could have a negative impact on your position here." Maya clenched her fists under the table, fighting to keep her voice steady. "What complaints, Lily? Who is complaining? Is it the people who've been ignoring me, treating me as less than, or is it the people who are uncomfortable because I'm not staying silent anymore?" Lily avoided her gaze, her eyes flicking to the side. "It's not about your silence, Maya. It's about your behavior. We can't have you challenging the status quo like this. It's unprofessional." Maya's jaw clenched, her patience wearing thin. "The status quo is broken, Lily. It's not about me being unprofessional. It's about me not letting you or anyone else treat me like I don't belong here. If that makes me unprofessional, then so be it." Lily took a deep breath, looking at Maya with a mixture of frustration and something else. Something that Maya couldn't quite place. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter how uncomfortable Lily felt. Maya wasn't there to make anyone feel comfortable. "You've made your point, Maya," Lily said, her voice tight. "But if you continue to challenge things this way, I'm afraid we won't be able to keep you here." Maya stood up, her eyes never leaving Lily's. "You think I'm challenging things because I want to make your life harder. I'm not. I'm challenging this system because it's built to break people like me. And I refuse to let that happen anymore. If you can't see that, then maybe I'm the one who doesn't belong here." With those words, Maya turned on her heel and walked out of the office, her heart pounding. But she didn't feel afraid, not anymore. She wasn't backing down, not for anyone. That evening, as Maya sat in her apartment, scrolling through the emails on her phone, she saw an unfamiliar name pop up in her inbox. It was an email from the board of directors at Crowley Industries. She clicked it open, her heart skipping a beat as she read the subject line. "Urgent. Meeting with board of directors. Immediate action required." Her hands trembled as she read the message. It was an invitation to a meeting at 9 a.m. the next day. She had no idea what it was about, but she could feel the weight of the words pressing down on her. This wasn't just another meeting. This was the culmination of everything she had fought for, and everything they had tried to bury. The next morning, Maya stood in front of the imposing glass building that was Crowley Industries. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale orange glow over the city. Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was about to come. She entered the building, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floors, her mind focused, her resolve unshakable. When she reached the conference room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The room was filled with the most powerful figures in the company, and they were all seated, waiting for her to arrive. Maya walked in, her presence commanding attention. She could feel their eyes on her. The judgment, the discomfort. But she refused to let it sway her. She took a seat at the head of the table, her posture straight, her hands folded in front of her. The chairman of the board, a tall, thin man with greying hair, cleared his throat as he looked at her. "Maya, thank you for joining us," he said, his voice a bit too smooth, too rehearsed. "We've called you here today to discuss your recent actions and behavior within the company." Maya nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I'm here because I've made it clear that I won't tolerate discrimination or racism in any form. I've made it clear that I won't remain silent while the people around me are treated as less than." The chairman's eyes narrowed, his tone hardening. "We understand that you feel strongly about these issues, but you've disrupted the flow of operations. You've made people uncomfortable with your accusations, your demands. This is a place of business, not a political arena. If you continue down this path, we'll have no choice but to let you go." Maya felt the room grow colder as the words settled around her. She had expected this. She had known this was coming. But it didn't matter. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't going to back down. "I'm not here for your approval," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to make people comfortable. I'm here to make sure that I am treated with the same respect as anyone else. I am not a token. I am not an exception. I am a qualified, capable professional, and I will not be silenced." There was a long silence in the room as the board members exchanged uneasy glances. But Maya didn't look away. She held their gaze, unflinching. "If you want me gone," she continued, "then you'll have to do more than just threaten me. But if you think I'm going to walk away from this fight, you're wrong." The chairman stared at her for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating. Then, with a slight shake of his head, he spoke. "We'll see about that, Maya. We'll see." And with that, Maya knew. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. Maya stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, staring at her reflection. The woman she saw looking back at her was different now. She wasn't the quiet, unsure woman who had walked into Crowley Industries months ago, hoping to prove herself. No. The woman in the mirror was fierce. She was resolute. She was tired of being told she didn't belong. She was tired of fighting for space in a world that constantly made her feel small. This was the moment, the final stand. The meeting with the board had shaken her, but it had also solidified her resolve. They thought they could intimidate her, make her back down, but they had no idea what she was capable of. They thought they could keep her quiet with threats, with condescension, with the subtle poison of their words. But Maya had seen through it all. She had seen the way they had looked at her, seen the way they treated her like she was an outsider, and she refused to let that happen anymore. She grabbed her purse, slinging it over her shoulder, and left her apartment. The weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her, but she walked with purpose. She wasn't just walking to another meeting. She was walking to reclaim her place, to take her power back. When Maya arrived at the office, the building felt different. The usual hum of activity seemed muted, like everything was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her as she walked through the lobby, and she didn't flinch. They thought they knew her. They thought they knew what she was capable of. But they didn't. She made her way to the conference room where the board of directors had gathered for their final meeting. The moment she stepped into the room, she knew the tension had already reached a boiling point. The cold, watchful eyes of the board members were trained on her, and she could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. They had already made their decision. They had already decided that she wasn't worth the trouble. But Maya wasn't there to plead her case anymore. She wasn't there to beg for her place in their world. She was there to take it. The chairman, the same thin-faced man who had spoken to her so coldly the day before, gave her a cursory nod as she entered. His lips curled into a smile, but it was one of those smiles that didn't reach the eyes. The smile of someone who thought they had already won. "Maya, I'm glad you could make it," he said, his voice almost too smooth. "We've given this a lot of thought, and we've come to a conclusion." Maya didn't sit down. She stood there, looking at each of them, her expression steady. "I don't need to hear what you've decided," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm done with your decisions. I'm done with your condescension. I'm done with your subtle racism, your undermining, your complete disregard for me as a person." The room fell into silence, and for a brief moment, Maya thought she saw a flicker of surprise in the chairman's eyes. But she didn't give him time to recover. She wasn't finished. "You think I'm the problem here," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "That I'm the one causing disruption. You think that by silencing me, by keeping me in my place, you can maintain control. But you've underestimated me. You've underestimated the power of a woman who's been told her whole life that she doesn't belong. You've underestimated me because you can't see beyond your own bias. But you will. You'll see exactly what I'm capable of." The chairman opened his mouth to speak, but Maya didn't let him. "You think I'm making things uncomfortable? No. What's uncomfortable is the system you've built. A system that rewards silence, that rewards conformity, and punishes anyone who dares to challenge it. You're not uncomfortable because of me. You're uncomfortable because you know you're wrong, and you know that I'm not going to let you get away with it anymore." Maya's heart was pounding in her chest, but she refused to let her fear show. She had been afraid for so long, afraid to speak up, afraid to lose her place, afraid of what might happen if she pushed too hard. But now, she was done being afraid. She was done letting them decide her worth. One of the board members, a woman in her late 50s with sharp features and a cold smile, spoke up. "Maya," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you've made it clear that you're not interested in fitting in with the company culture. But understand this, we have worked hard to get where we are. We don't have time for your crusade." Maya's eyes locked on the woman's, unblinking. "No," Maya said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. "You've worked hard to maintain a culture of exclusion, of silence, of inequality, and that's what I'm fighting against. I don't need your approval. I don't need you to accept me. But I'm not leaving until I've made it clear that I won't be silenced, and neither will anyone else who's been told they don't belong here." There was a long pause, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. The board members exchanged looks, clearly unsure of how to respond. The chairman seemed particularly unsettled now, his confident demeanor cracking. "You've made your point, Maya," the chairman said, his voice tense. "But you have to understand that this company cannot—" "I understand perfectly," Maya interrupted, her tone unwavering. "You cannot afford to lose control. You cannot afford to let anyone else disrupt your little bubble. But that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm disrupting it. And you're not going to stop me." Maya turned her gaze to the rest of the room, her eyes sweeping over each of them. For the first time, she saw something in their faces that she hadn't seen before. Doubt. They were no longer looking at her with disdain, but with a flicker of uncertainty, of realization. They could no longer deny what was happening. "I've fought for every inch of space I've been given," Maya continued, her voice stronger now. "And I'm not going to stop fighting until I've earned every inch of respect. You cannot break me. You cannot silence me. And if you want to fire me for that, then do it. But know this, I will never back down. I will never stop pushing for change. And I will make sure that your world, your system, crumbles under the weight of the truth." The chairman's face turned an angry shade of red, but Maya didn't flinch. "You're fired, Maya," he said through gritted teeth. "You can leave right now." Maya didn't move. She just stood there, looking him in the eye. "You've already made the biggest mistake of your life," she said, her voice quiet but full of finality. "And you'll regret it." With that, Maya turned and walked out of the room, the echoes of her footsteps filling the silent space. She didn't look back. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Maya knew what she had done would send shockwaves through the company. She had known that walking away would be hard, that it might even seem like a defeat to some, but to her, it was a victory. She had stood her ground. She had fought back against a system that sought to silence her, to break her. And now, she was free. Maya didn't stay in silence after leaving Crowley Industries. She began speaking publicly about her experience, about the subtle racism and systemic discrimination that had shaped her career. Her words resonated with others who had faced similar battles. People from all walks of life reached out to her, sharing their stories, expressing gratitude for her courage to speak up. In the end, it wasn't just about her fight for a job, for a place in a company. It was about fighting for dignity, for respect, and for equality, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been pushed aside. Maya didn't need their approval. She had found her own voice, and that was all she needed. The storm was over, and she had emerged victorious. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What do you think about Maya's journey? Have you ever experienced racism or felt like you didn't belong in a space? Your experiences and insights mean a lot to us, and we truly value each and every one of you. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to show your support. It really helps us continue bringing more content your way. Before you go, take a moment to leave a comment, share your thoughts, or write a phrase related to the story, so we know you've listened all the way to the end. Have a wonderful day.